Hi everyone, my name is Danny. I'm Simshan from northern coastal BC. I work here as a violence prevention and support coordinator. I also co-facilitate a group for Indigenous sex workers, current and former. It's a monthly meeting group where we share a dinner and cultural teachings and try to heal together. Um, yeah. And over to you, Sophia.
Cool. My name is Sophia. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a white settler who's living on the Kwanghan territory on Vancouver Island. I'm the operations manager at Peers, and I facilitate our group for current and former trans, non-binary, and two-spirit sex workers. And today we're going to talk to you about sex work laws. So, basically, the foundation for the current laws on sex work in this country was the Bedford case. So prior to the Bedford case, sex work was not technically illegal in Canada, but everything related to sex work was. So it was basically impossible to be a sex worker and not be committing a crime. And this made it very difficult to report violence, made it very difficult to be safe. So three prominent sex work activists, as well as a lot of other sex workers and allies, challenged the constitutionality of these laws because they said that it violated their human rights under the Charter, specifically Section 7, which involved security of persons. And the courts actually agreed with them. It was a unanimous decision, and they gave the government 1 year to change the laws, which they did through the current legal framework that Danny will talk about.
Yeah, so the laws today is somewhat of a Nordic style model. The criminal code is called the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act. And also when they did this, they gave them a 5-year, 5-year time for then the laws to be reviewed again. So basically what they did is create the actual sex work is legal, but it really criminalizes the customer, which is quite problematic because not all people who buy sex work are criminals. They just want intimacy, or they may feel lonely. They may have just gotten a divorce. So it really criminalizes a lot of really good people who just want a service. It is prohibited to purchase sexual services or communicate in any place for that purpose. It creates an offense that prohibits receiving material benefit that derived from the commission of an offense. So commission from sex work. You cannot advertise sexual services in Canada. You cannot work in pairs. I think those are most of them.
Most of them. If you are paying attention, you'll notice that these laws are virtually identical to the laws that they supposedly replaced. There are some differences in legalese, but in practicality, almost nothing has changed. Danny pointed out most of them. The only other ones that I'd say were pretty major to talk about are like the third-party laws, which Danny did reference, in which you can't hire a driver, you can't work at an agency, you can't you can't even really own a website, or you can, but the internet provider can be charged for facilitating you providing that website. So no one else can be involved in your sex work, which is impossible because there's no way to operate any type of economic activity without anyone else being involved. The other provisions I don't want to talk about are just some around human trafficking, like that don't have this explicitly in the law, but in practice end up being used to racially profile a lot of migrant and Asian sex workers, justifying a lot of police raids on consensual brothels, not trafficking sites, places where people are working because they choose to, and in the end, by increasing that criminalization, end up criminalizing migrant sex workers as well, who many of whom are violating visas by being a sex worker. So the laws that are claiming to be saving people from human trafficking are actually being used to deport consensual sex workers and trafficking survivors as well.
Hmm. For sure. Um, and yeah, so in BC, there is a guideline surrounding like saying that we will not be abiding by these sex work laws, and it's BC wide, and it's in hopes that sex workers can come forward and report sexualized violence when it happens to them. Unfortunately, this isn't something that's like mandated or like it's like just exists. It isn't mandated in people's like workplace when they're police officers workplace. So it makes it kind of useless in that way that there aren't the guidelines at every force. In Victoria, we were lucky enough that the Victoria Police wrote and said that they would not be abiding by these laws or guidelines, and that they also kind of had the hope that sex workers could come forward to them if they were assaulted at work. Yeah, so these are still serious limitations to this. Like for the BC wide, if people aren't aware of this guideline, they can really police sex workers however they want, which is extremely problematic, especially in northern communities when there's a lot of like Indigenous women and there's already that bad relationship with police. And if an Indigenous woman is doing sex work, it's like could be way more likely she could experience police violence or brutality or just not being believed or treated with basic human respect. In Victoria, like it was just a letter kind of written to peers specifically. But yeah, it's we haven't seen too many like violations of the agreement that we have. And we have a police liaison worker. So yeah, the limitations would really just lie in like, just that police have a lot of discretion. And sex workers also work in Langford, and we don't work with the RCMP very much out there. They work all over the island, so they could be getting any kind of treatment anywhere. And in Vancouver, for example, they are definitely not following the guidelines, and some pretty heavy stuff is happening over there.
Exactly. And just another like flaw with the guidelines and the laws is that they are very confusing and not accessible. So, like regardless of what the laws say, lots of sex workers don't really feel very like confident on the laws. I mean, like we work in violence prevention and like sex work advocacy, and even we have to check the laws constantly because they are very convoluted and sometimes contradict themselves. Like, and in one section, it'll say that working together is okay, and then in another section, it'll say something that effectively means that working together could get you charged with something. So many people can't even do the things that are legal to keep themselves safe. So, like, even though the laws have changed in some ways, many people still operate the exact same way because they're too afraid of making a mistake that could lead them into really big trouble. And that kind of really speaks to the major problem with the laws is that like they make people isolated. They make people work and advertise like far away from other people or like mainstream media, um, which increases danger and increases the chance of attracting dangerous clients. It decreases the ability to screen clients ahead of time because they're afraid of their own identity, and you can't really share information under the laws. It's and and because you can't really hire a driver or other sex workers to work with or work in like a stable, safe location. Again, just like at every point, the job is just made more dangerous and more difficult, um, which is unfortunate because the laws supposedly are supposed to eliminate sex work, but the sex work hasn't decreased because it's not a bad behavior. Sex work is a job and for many people a survival strategy. So this hasn't actually decreased the amount of sex work, it's just made sex work even more dangerous than it was. We at Peers, like many sex work organizations, advocate for decriminalization over full legalization because we're primarily concerned with ending the criminalization of sex work, ending the prosecution of sex work, ending sex workers feeling unsafe or prohibited from safety by the government and the police. Legalization comes with its own package of problems. It comes with regulation, licensing, rules on how to do sex work, which still ends people in trouble, especially if you do street-based sex work or survival-based sex work. So we just find that decriminalization is the most accessible solution to legal prosecution for all sex workers.
And I would also add to that that decriminalization is what they do in New Zealand, and it works really well for them there. A few years ago, some people from Peers got to go down there and kind of talk to them about like how it worked there. So yeah, it's a really good model, and if you have any interest in looking into their model, I would definitely recommend looking at New Zealand. And that's the end of our presentation. So thank you so much for virtually joining us in this. Yeah, okay. Bye.